When my daughter started talking about the man in the corner, I thought it was just a child's imagination, until I saw it too. It started innocently enough. My daughter Aaliyah, barely 3 years old, began mentioning the man in the corner during our bedtime routine. I would tuck her into bed, read her a story, and just as I was about to turn off the light, she'd point to the far corner of the room and whisper, "The man's here, Mommy." I laughed it off at first, chalking it up to the vivid imagination of a toddler. Kids have imaginary friends, I told myself. But something about the way she said it, the way her eyes would focus on that shadowed corner, made my skin crawl. Every night, it was the same routine. "The man's here, Mommy," she would say, her little finger pointing toward the darkened corner. She didn't seem afraid, more so curious. I would smile, reassure her that there was no man, just shadows, and kiss her goodnight. One night, as I kissed her goodnight and walked out of her room, I kept thinking about the man in the corner, and the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. I checked in on her a few more times that night, walking around her room, standing by her bedside looking into corners to see if, perhaps, there was a trick of the moonlight from her blinds. Nothing. I saw nothing that could be remotely mistaken for a man. Finally, I went across the hall to my room. Around midnight, I heard Aaliyah's soft cries coming from her room. I jumped out of bed and rushed to her, my heart pounding in my chest. As I rushed through her doorway, I froze. There, in the corner of the room, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. It was tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs too long, its face a pale, distorted mask of twisted flesh. Its eyes were hollow, empty voids that seemed to suck the light out of the room, and its mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin that made my stomach churn. It was real. The man in the corner was real. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth as I took a step back, my eyes locked onto the thing in the corner. It didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, just stood there, staring at Aaliyah with those empty eyes. I ran to her bed, scooping her up in my arms. She clung to me, her tiny body trembling with fear, her face buried in my shoulder.
"He's here, Mommy."
She whimpered, her voice muffled against my shirt. "I know, baby. I know," I whispered, my voice shaking. I turned to leave the room, but as I did, the thing in the corner moved. It took a step forward, its long, bony fingers reaching out toward us, its grin widening, exposing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. I screamed, bolting out of the room. Aaliyah clutched tightly to my chest. I didn't stop running until we were in the living room. The door slammed shut behind us. For a moment, I stood there, panting, my heart racing, my mind reeling from what I had just seen. But as I looked down at my daughter, her tear-streaked face pressed against my chest, I knew I had to do something. With Aaliyah in my arms, I grabbed my phone and keys and ran outside. It was only when we were completely out of the house that I looked up, and my heart dropped. I locked eyes with that thing. It was watching us from Aaliyah's bedroom window. After what seemed like an eternity, it turned, walking back into the bedroom, leaving the window dark and empty. I called my brother, who was working a night shift at the hospital. He answered on the first ring, his voice filled with concern.
"What's wrong?"
"You need to come home. Now," I said, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice.
"What's going on?"
"I can't explain it over the phone. Just please, come home. Aaliyah and I, we're not safe here." He didn't question me further. We hung up and I stood in my front yard, thankful my brother moved in to help me after Jason passed away. The moment I thought about calling police, I dismissed it. There was no cop in their right might who'd believe me. Within 15 minutes, he was home, his face pale and drawn as he got out of his car.
What happened?
He demanded, his eyes scanning us and then the house for any sign of danger. "There's something in Aaliyah's room," I said in a low voice. "Something not human," my voice barely audible. He stared at me, disbelief and fear warring in his eyes. But he knew I was not the hysterical type and didn't question me. He just nodded and went to his trunk, pulling out his old baseball bat.
Stay here with Aaliyah, I'll check it out.
"No!" I cried, grabbing his arm. "Don't go in there. You don't understand. This thing, it's not human." He just looked at me. "I called you so we could all leave together, get a room for the night, or stay at one of your buddies. Then tomorrow in the daylight we can come back. A group of us. We could come back and just pack what we need and leave." He looked at me, his expression softening. And for a moment, I saw the fear in his eyes too. But then he nodded, squeezing my hand.
I'll be careful. Just stay here with Aaliyah.
He walked up to the house, opened the door, and started down the hallway, leaving the front door wide open so I can see. The bat clenched tightly in his hands. I didn't move, didn't breathe, my heart in my throat, as I watched him open Aaliyah's door from the hallway. For a long moment, there was silence. Just as I thought I must have imagined this whole thing, I heard it. A low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. Then, everything happened at once. My brother's eyes went wide for a split second as he was bringing the bat back for a swing, and in the next instant, it was as if he was snatched inside the room. But I never saw anything actually grab him. One moment he was ready to fight, and the next he was just in the room. I heard growling and a scream, bat hitting flesh, followed by the sound of something heavy crashing to the floor. I sprinted to the car and put Aaliyah inside, yelling that she stay inside until I come back. I turned and bolted to the house. "Tom!" I screamed, running through the hallway. But as I reached the doorway, I froze. The room was empty. The bed was overturned, the dresser smashed, but there was no sign of Tom. No sign of the thing in the corner, just the empty room, bathed in the dim glow of the nightlight. "Tom?" I whispered, my voice shaking. But there was no response. I backed away, my heart pounding, the realization slowly sinking in. The thing in the corner had taken him, and it was still out there, waiting, watching. I ran to the car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys, desperate to get as far away from that house as possible. As I sped down the road, tears streaming down my face, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the thing in the corner sitting in the back seat, its hollow eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing there, just the dark, empty road stretching out before us. I never went back to that house. I sold it as soon as I could. I told everyone interested in the house about the creature, and every one of them thought I was insane. But even now, years later, I still see it in my nightmares. The thing in the corner, its hollow eyes, its twisted grin. Sometimes it even looks like my brother, and I know deep down that it's still out there, waiting. And one day it will come for me too.